But today, our topic for impact training is hard questions about the Bible. I'll let you guys vote, and this was our top vote getter. So we'll deal with some of those issues that you guys voted and said you wanted to hear about. And so this was our number one voted topic to hear from. So hard questions about the Bible. Where did it come from? Why can we trust it? Isn't the Bible full of errors? And the big idea today is if we want to share God's Word, then we want to be confident in God's Word. And so that'll be, and there's lots of reasons to be confident of God's Word, and that's where we're going to go today. So let's pray, and then I'm just going to walk through that handout, and I would love for you guys to ask questions. This is going to be a very high-level overview. In fact, I'm not really going to answer the questions with much depth at all because there's so many of them, but I'm going to try to point you in a direction for how to deal with certain questions that come up a lot. So let's pray, and then we'll dive in. So, Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus, and we say thank you so much for your incredible goodness in our lives. We look around us, and we see this beautiful world you've created. We see human beings in the image of you that fill this earth. But we also sense that the world isn't the way it should be. So we praise you for the gospel, that through Jesus you want to redeem and save not just us, but this world. And we know that the Bible is a testimony of your love for this world and your love for us. And we know that it's also comes under a lot of scrutiny and even attack. And so, God, today I pray that you'd help us see clearly and accurately, not over-optimistically, but also we'd see all the reasons why we should trust and see the Bible as your word. In Jesus' name we ask that. Amen. So if we want to share God's word, which is what impact training is all about, is impacting the world, then we've got to be confident in God's word. And so you guys know, because you live in the world, that there are a lot of people who criticize the reliability, the trustworthiness of the Bible. Isn't it full of errors? Isn't it full of contradictions? A few things just by way of introduction, starting at the top, is the Bible really is a book, other book that's ever existed. Since the 1500s, it's been the best-selling book every year for 500 years. It's the most translated book, the most read book, the most influential single work of literature in all of history. So that's the Bible. Also, another thing I want to clear up for you is the Bible actually isn't a book. Mind blown. A better way to think of the Bible is a library. It's an anthology. It's a collection of a lot of books. It's actually 66 books all bound into one volume. So you could think of the Bible as more of an anthology. Like you can, sometimes for your classes, you get an anthology of Western literature, and it starts in the 500s BC with Plato and Aristotle, and it goes all the way up to like Mark Twain 150 years ago. And so it's different authors over a long period of time. And so the Bible, really more than one book, it's a collection of 66 books written over 1,500 years, 40 different authors, written on 3 continents, written in 3 languages, written in multiple genres: history, poetry, prophecy, letters, Jewish apocalyptic literature. And in spite of all of that, it has one message, clear message from beginning to end, that God is the unique creator of all the universe, all that is, that he cares about his rebellious humanity, and that he had a plan from the beginning to rescue people from their sin. And so from the beginning to the end, one message, and it all is about Jesus. So another, and I can't remember if this is on your handout, but I think all, if not most of you guys, most if not all you guys are Christians in the room. Here's what I also want us to remember is we are Christians, not Bible-arians. In other words, our faith and our confidence, the unique object of our love and devotion is Jesus. We don't worship the Bible. We don't say that the Bible is the centerpiece of our faith. We love and worship Jesus because we don't believe the Bible is God. We think it's from him, but we worship Jesus. And so sometimes we can conflate the two, and some people can almost be more defensive of and fight for the Bible instead of Jesus. Here's one thing I'll tell you is if we found contradictions in the Bible, and we found out the Red Sea didn't part, and we found out that some of the letters and books contradicted each other, but we had proof that Jesus was alive and not dead, then we'd have every reason to be a confident Christian. Even if there's contradictions in the Bible, but there's good reason to believe Jesus is alive, then our faith is on solid ground. Now, if we could prove everything that people say the Bible purports, even the controversial stuff, like if we could prove that the earth is 6,000 years old and the Red Sea parted and the sun stood still when Joshua said the sun stood still, but Jesus were still dead, we don't have any hope at all. So our hope is in Christ, being alive and not dead, not in the Bible. With that said, the Bible, our Old Testament, was testified to by Jesus. So we take it as God's word. He said it was God's word, so we take it as God's word because we worship him. The New Testament was written by men who Jesus commissioned and gave truth to and asked them to give it to us. So we believe the Old Testament because of Jesus. We believe in the New Testament because of Jesus, but we're Christians, not Bible-arians. Another thing I'll say about attacks on the Bible is a ton of the attacks that come. Has anybody ever seen like atheist TikTok? It's like a real thing. It's like huge. It's like channels that pump out videos and get tons of attention. There's like atheist Instagram. There's definitely atheist Twitter. There's atheist Facebook, atheist social media. Most of the attacks on the trustworthiness of the Bible don't come from evidence, but come from those who disdain the worldview of the Bible. There are people who have legitimate concerns and even grievances about the scriptures, but you need to sort through as you read a source. Is this somebody who's really investigating the claims and is actually reading the Bible, or is this somebody who's just spewing stuff that's not really trying to understand the deep issues? And so you weigh some of the criticism according to where it's coming from. Interestingly, if you think of all the weird claims about the Bible and then you compare them to actual biblical scholarship, even the scholarship that comes from the atheists, but who are Bible scholars. Did you know there are such people exist? There are atheists who study the Bible academically. They're faculty at all the Ivy League schools and at these elite schools, and they publish books and they study the text. They just believe Jesus is dead, not alive. One of the most famous, his name is Bart Ehrman. He did his education at Princeton. He and Wheaton College, then Princeton, did his PhD under the most preeminent New Testament scholar of 50 years ago. And Bart Ehrman teaches at UNC Chapel Hill, which is kind of a major national research university. And he was a Bible-believing Christian turned an agnostic, but he's the preeminent non-believing New Testament scholar in the world. Preeminent New Testament scholar in the world who doesn't believe. But here's what Bart Ehrman says. He says Jesus unequivocally was a real human being. So if you read people who say he was a myth, those people usually aren't actually reading scholarship. They're reading outdated internet articles. So Bart Ehrman says Jesus really lived. He wasn't a myth. The stories about him weren't borrowed from other religions. He's not the Horus of Egyptian mythology turned into a Jewish god. He's not Babylonian mythology turned into a Jewish god. They're actually unique stories. Bart Ehrman says that. Always consider the source. I've met way too many students who watched a YouTube video by an internet atheist who wasn't actually doing research, who was like regurgitating stuff that had been disproven by good scholarship 50 or 100 years ago, and regurgitating the points, and they didn't take any time to actually read current scholarship or read an apologetics website. They just saw a guy on TikTok or they saw a guy on YouTube, and it challenged and shook their faith, and they walked away from their faith. So Actually consider the source and consider if it's a good source whenever you're dealing with these kinds of questions. Let's see what else I want to say. So one of my goals today is, if you look on your handout, there's just a ton of questions that people and accusations people make about the Bible. The goal today is just to give a primer and point to the right answers. Sometimes these talks about the Bible, reliability of the Bible, can overwhelm us with details and facts and figures. And I know that most of you are eating pizza and you're not going to absorb lots of facts and details. So we're just going to we're going to give direction on questions without going into all the information, but it'll help you know which way to go with the information. If you want to write down a couple of sources that I think are just easy to access, good sources, there's a little website called Got Questions. And I don't love Got Questions all the time, but it's gotquestions.org. And it's like 10,000 questions about Christianity and the Bible and cults and theology and just all of that stuff. But you can just enter your question. It'll bring up a bunch of answers. And it's generally pretty good. And the information they put there is pretty accurate. Think Biblically is a great podcast and website. That's Sean McDowell. He's a Christian scholar and apologist at Talbot Seminary. Think Biblically. Stand to Reason is a good one. Stand to Reason. That's Greg Kokel. He's been here on our stage to talk at Impact Training in the past. And one is Cross-Examined. That's Frank Turek, and he's also been at Impact Training in the past. And those websites are easy to read articles, but they have good scholarship and links to the sources and all of that sort of thing. Another thing I want to talk about, anybody taken a psychology class and has heard the term from psychology, anti-fragility? You know that term? So the idea behind anti-fragility is we get stronger by undergoing stress and testing. And so sometimes we think of children, for instance, as being fragile and delicate, and we need to protect them. And they're like a wine glass. And if you think about a wine glass, you can bump it a little bit, but if you bump it too hard, it shatters. But that's not how people are. People aren't fragile like that. They're more like a muscle. And if you test a muscle and you go to the gym and you work it out really hard, then it tears it down and it builds back stronger. And way too many times in the American church, when it comes to hard questions, we've just not exposed youth groups, we've not exposed Christians to the legitimate hard questions about the Bible. You know, there are some pretty weird things in the Bible. But if you never hear about the fact that, I'll just throw a couple out. John chapter 8 is one of our favorite chapters in the Bible, Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. Did you know a lot of the ancient manuscripts don't have that story in it? Did you know the ending of Mark's gospel, where he gives the Great Commission? Very few of the oldest manuscripts even have that ending in it. There's actually a verse in 1 John chapter 5 that was not in any ancient manuscript until the King James Bible was published. And apparently it was in the one that they used in the King James, so it ended up in the King James. Then everybody flipped out whenever we discovered the tens of thousands of ancient manuscripts, and they took that verse out of 1 John, and they're editing the Bible, we can't trust it. And so, but we shield young Christians from that information, and the first time you hear about it is from some internet atheist. And then we've become fragile because we've never been tested and tried with hard evidence. And then when we do hear about it, it's not from somebody who's saying there are hard questions and there are good answers, but from somebody who's just trying to rip and tear apart the foundations of faith. Who's ever built with Legos? Hopefully, I love Legos. Is it easier to build a cool thing with Legos, or is it easier to just crush it and tear it down? And sometimes it's even more fun just to crush it at the end when you're done. And so you build and you build and build. And building takes time, it takes effort, it takes planning, it takes a little bit of forethought. But to tear something down takes no thought. You can just be reckless and tear down, but it takes time and energy to build up. It's a lot easier to attack the Bible than it is to actually build the case for credibility, because that's just true of any subject. It's easier to tear down than to build. And so sometimes if you don't take the time to think about these questions, then when somebody just comes in and wants to smash your faith and you're not willing to go do the hard work of actually reading a book then your faith could get crushed. But I'm here to tell you there's good reason to believe that the Bible we have is the Bible we wrote. That the Bible they wrote was inspired by God. That the translations that you have are good translations. So a couple of vocabulary words. I can't remember if this is on your sheet, but there's 4 steps to get the Bible that we've got now. The first step is inspiration. If you want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, you may already know these words, but step 1 is inspiration. This is where God inspires the human author to write. We don't believe that the Bible descended from heaven on gold plates. It was actually a very messy process over lots and lots of time. And the Old Testament process was different than the New Testament process. And the people writing they thought they were writing things that were true. But in many cases, it wasn't until later, especially with the New Testament, that the church looked back and said, you know what? This letter Paul wrote, there's something special and unique about it. We think that God inspired this, and we're going to treasure this and preserve this. And so the church looking back, Paul might have just been thinking, I'm writing a letter to the church in Ephesus because they need some doctrinal instruction. But the church looking back said, we've gotten a lot of letters, but this one's different. This one has the hand of God on it. This one, we sense the breath of God in it. And so it wasn't this neat process where the golden plates descended out of heaven like the Mormons say they got their Bible, or it wasn't the way the Muslims say they got the Quran, which is Muhammad went into a cave and literally the angel moved his hand or told him verbatim the words to write, and he was just like an empty vessel. It was just like Jesus was fully human, yet fully God. The inspiration of our scriptures, it was a human process. They were real people writing real letters under real circumstances. When you read Paul, you see some of Paul's human personality come out. He's feisty, he's salty. When you read John, you see some of John's personality come out. He's poetic, he's thoughtful. When you read Luke, you see some of Luke's personality come out. He's a formidable intellect. He's an academic, and you see that in his writing. So you see the humanity, but then the church also looked and said, but there's something different about these. And over time, the church unanimously agreed that these had the hand of God on them. So that's inspiration. Then there's transmission. That's the idea of the telephone game. What we have, we don't have any of the originals. We've got copies of copies of copies of copies. We'll talk in a minute about whether we can trust our copies. And then there's translation. So those are the steps. I think on your handout it says 3 really broad reasons why we trust the Bible as Christians, even though it's messy and complicated. One is just historical accuracy. The Bible describes real places, real people. No archaeological discovery has ever disproven or contradicted a statement attested to in the Bible. Some people will say, isn't the Bible full of errors? Well, you got to ask them to tell you which error that is. Now, not everything that happened in the Bible do we have some archaeological discovery that proved it. But there's never been an archaeological discovery that disproves some clear assertion of Scripture. So it's historically reliable, historically accurate. Number 2 is it's full of fulfilled prophecy. The Bible predicts things that would happen and then they came to pass. And nowhere more profoundly than in Jesus. Prophets for 500 years predicted in excruciating detail the life of the coming Savior. And he was born where they said he would be born. And he lived the way they said he would live. And he fled to Egypt the way they said he fled to Egypt. And then he came back to Nazareth the way they said he'd come back to Nazareth. And then he preached the way they said he would preach. And then he died in step-by-step detail, the way Psalm 22 said he would die, and the way Isaiah 53 said that he would die. And then he came back the way they predicted. And so fulfilled prophecy gives us confidence that this isn't an ordinary book, that it's a divine book. And then finally, personal testimony. For 2,000 years, the Bible has changed millions of lives. It has altered society, and it's changed my life, and its message has changed your life. I still remember the Bible I got when I graduated high school. When I first started to take my faith seriously, I got a thin line NIV, New International Version, 1984, the best translation ever. And I used it through college. I did my daily quiet time in it. It was the first time I really started to devour God's Word, and the spine started coming apart. The pages started coming out, and I started putting super glue in the spine, and I'd stick it back in and fall out again, and I'd put more super glue, and it ended up having like layer on layer and layer of super glue, and whole sections were falling out, and I'm like, oh, the Exodus, we need to keep that in. We put it back in. But there's an old saying that says, a Bible falling apart belongs to a person who isn't. Because the Bible's powerful. Scripture's powerful to change lives. So before we roll into questions, Vodi Bakum wrote a little book called The Ever-Loving Truth. It's really good. And here's his statement on why he trusts the Bible. He says, I choose to believe the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents. It was written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. You understand why that's important? It's called corroboration. The New Testament was written during a time when people who saw the events all saw the events, and people wrote it down, and people who could have contradicted it and said it didn't happen like that were still alive. And so it was written by eyewitnesses in the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. They report supernatural events that took place to fulfill specific prophecies, thus validating their claim that the book is divine rather than human in origin. And by the way, I'm a living testimony of the power of that book. So let's jump into some of the questions on the bottom, and we may not get to all of them, but if there's one you really want to hear, say, ooh, what about this one? But the first that we hear a lot is, isn't the Bible full of contradictions and errors? Isn't the Bible full of contradictions? First, let's talk about what a contradiction is, because when a lot of people will say contradictions, you say, what do you mean? And they'll say something like, well, the Bible teaches the earth is flat. And the answer is, well, A, it doesn't, and B, that's not what a contradiction is. So first, let's define a contradiction. That is when a document or a person claims that something is true and the exact same thing is false. A is true, A is false. That's a contradiction. Does that make sense? Contradiction. A is true, A is false. A contradiction is not saying A is complicated or saying that A isn't easy to understand. A contradiction is saying A is true, A is false. If somebody tells you the Bible is full of contradictions, you know what your first question back to them, your first response should be? Like what? Tell me what contradiction bothers you. Now, don't be sassy about it. Be genuinely inquisitive. Because what you don't have the obligation as a Christian to do, if somebody says the Bible is full of contradictions, you don't have to say, well, let me go look up the list of 12,000 supposed contradictions and answer all 12,000 of them right there. Greg Kokel, he's the guy, I think his website was the Stand to Reason. He says you should always just flip the questions. Use tactics in these kinds of conversations. If somebody makes an accusation, just make sure you clearly understand the accusation. Because a lot of times people don't actually, the thing that bothers them, they really haven't even thought about why it bothers them. So if they say there's contradictions, well, tell me which one you mean. And a lot of times people say, well, I don't know. I just watched the TikTok video that said they were there. And say, well, man, that's great. You should research and tell me which ones bother you, and then we can actually talk about them. But I can't talk about contradictions if you can't actually name one. Mike Lacona is a Christian apologist. We've had him here before, and he talks about how tons of the contradictions aren't actually contradictions. So I went through this week, and I pulled some atheist websites, lists of contradictions in the Bible. Let me go through some of them, and you tell me if they're actually contradictions. And these are from actual, pretty well-known atheist websites. So one is, when did the fig tree wither when Jesus cursed it? Because in Mark's account, Jesus curses the fig tree as they're walking into Jerusalem, and it says, and the fig tree withered. Like he cursed it and it withered, and it makes it sound like he did it, and it happened right then and there. In Matthew's account, it says they're walking, and Jesus curses the fig tree, and then they go into town, and he preaches in the temple, and then he goes back to Bethany, and then the next day they go back to Jerusalem, and when they get back to the fig tree, it's withered. And it made it sound like it took a day. So Mark makes it sound like it's immediately. The other one. Is that a contradiction? No, it's not. In both accounts, first off, both accounts pretty much line up. Jesus curses the fig tree withered. Mark said he cursed it and it withered. Matthew says he cursed it, the next day it was withered. Guess what? They're saying the same thing. Now, Mark doesn't have to give a detailed chronology of everything that he wants to say. He didn't have to say we left Bethany at 8:01 a.m. and we arrived at the fig tree at 8:05. He said he cursed it and it withered. And Matthew said he cursed it and it withered. That's actually not a contradiction. Another one, I saw this one. Matthew and Luke mention the virgin birth. Paul and John don't mention the virgin birth. Is that a contradiction? No, if Jacob and I are both witness an event, and I tell my version and Jacob tells his version, I may include details that Jacob doesn't include. That's not a contradiction just because one includes it and one doesn't. What about the genealogies? Matthew gives a genealogy of Jesus, and Luke gives a genealogy of Jesus, and guess what? They're pretty different. They both trace to Joseph, Jesus' father. Matthew, they're both the same until you get to King David. But then they get different because Matthew traces Jesus' lineage through the kings of Israel. Luke traces Jesus' lineage through a bunch of people we ain't never heard of. But part of what's going on there is we always ask the question, C.S. Lewis talked about what he called chronological snobbery. When we say, this is how in 21st century America, this is how we think things have to be written on paper. When we talk about a genealogy, this is exactly what a genealogy, it has to have the exact number of years and the exact name and dates and birth locations. This is our standard. In the ancient world, genealogies were used for different purposes. Sometimes they were used so for instance, Matthew, what if, and this is what I think is true, what if Matthew's making the point, there's a line of the men who are rightfully the king of Israel. And here's the line of the kings of Israel. And here at the end of the line is Jesus. And when it all plays out, Jesus is the king of Israel. And we know from other ancient cultures, when they would trace the lines of their kings, they would say, so-and-so was the father of so-and-so, who was the father of so-and-so. And it's tracing the line of the kings. But sometimes the guy's nephew became king, but he called him his son. Sometimes he would adopt, this was common in the Roman world, sometimes Caesar would not have a male heir or he wouldn't like his own kids, so he'd adopt a general and he would call him his son, and they would call him the son of Caesar, the son of the king, in the genealogies, but he actually had no biological relationship. And so when Matthew does what all the other ancient writers do, the modern reader calls it a contradiction, but it's just how they recorded details back then. So is that a contradiction? Not a contradiction. Let's see. Well, we could go through several more, but for time's sake, let's do the next one. How about this one? All we have you heard this, are copies of copies of copies of copies. The Bible's like the telephone game. You know the telephone game? I'm going to whisper in your ear, you're going to whisper in somebody's ear, and by the time it goes all the way around the circle, the message has been changed. How do we know that what we call the Greek text of the New Testament is actually the Greek text that they wrote? A few things I'd say there. One is there's two key issues, and some of you have heard this material before. One is how many copies of the ancient manuscripts do we have? And the other question is, what's the amount of time between when the original author wrote it and we actually have a copy of it? So those are two important questions, right? So like say the author wrote it and we have a copy, but they're like 2,000 years apart. Well, that's a lot of time for stuff to change. Say the author wrote it and they're 200 years apart. Well, that's less time. Say they're 50 years apart. It's even less time. Say they're 20 years apart, that's even less time. Most of the documents from the ancient world that we have and trust, apart from the Bible, the spans of time are 300 to 500 years. From when Plato wrote till we have his earliest manuscript, from when the Greek poets wrote, and we have from when the Roman historians wrote, and we have their earliest manuscript. Do you know what it is for the Bible? Anybody venture a guess? From the time a piece of the scripture was written till we have a manuscript, a piece of it, manuscripted.
30 years?
30 years, that would be pretty good, yeah. 50 years would actually be amazing, yeah. For the longest time, we thought it was 30 years because the Gospel of John was written in roughly 90 AD, and there's a manuscript called the Rylands Papyrus, as they found it about 150 years ago. The thing about manuscripts is they keep finding more and more and more. And a lot of the criticisms of the Bible were first leveled 150 years ago when we had almost none. And now we have over 10,000 manuscripts from the ancient world of the Bible. Most of the other ancient documents, we have a dozen. We have 5. We have 10. 10,000 manuscripts with a distance of 30 years. So the Rylands Papyrus, 120 AD. John's written in 90 AD. You may have seen this on the news about 5 years ago. They found a piece of the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew's written about 65, 67 AD. And this piece of the Gospel of Matthew that they found is a page out of Matthew's Gospel. Their best guess is it's written in the mid-80s to early 80s AD. It's old enough that it could have laid on the table and they copied it straight from Matthew's original. It's that close. The Rylands Papyrus is close enough that it could have laid on the table next to John's scroll that he wrote Revelation on, and they copied it directly from it. So the telephone game argument is one of the weakest arguments. I actually brought for you guys, if you want to thumb through it later, that's Old Testament. This is a Greek New Testament, and they call this a critical text. And what it does is it lists the Greek New Testament at the top, and then the bottom, everywhere there's a difference in any of those 10,000 manuscripts. Pretty much they all line up perfectly, but anywhere there's a difference, they make a footnote, and they tell you which ones have it listed one way and which have it listed the other way. Do you know what the most common error is? A misspelled word. The most common difference is a misspelled word. Occasionally there's a transposed word where it says like, it just takes 2 words and it flips the order. And in Greek, word order actually doesn't matter. The word endings determine the part of speech, not where it is in the sentence. So it doesn't change the meaning at all. There are a handful of places that it's a different word, but usually it's like a cognate word or a synonym for the word. Do you know how many times there's a difference in the ancient manuscripts that it actually affects any doctrine of the Christian faith? You know how many times there's a difference that it would affect anything we actually believe that makes us a Christian? 5, 10. It's 0 unless you're a snake handler in Appalachia. Because one of the verses that's like maybe not original is the one at the end of Mark where it talks about if you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you can get bit by snakes and you don't die. And that those churches in Appalachia, they actually, in their church services, handle snakes. So unless you're one of those guys, then there's not a single error or not a single discrepancy that matters. So let's keep going. How about this one? The Bible was written so much later that it can't be accurate. The Bible was written so much that the events turned into myths over time. Have you heard that before? Do you know what I'm talking about there? Some people will say something like, well, the Gospels were written like 200 years after Jesus lived anyway, right? So over time, they invented all these stories about him walking on water and healing the sick and dying and rising again. And so there was all this time for them to turn him into this mythological hero, because from the time he lived to the time they wrote was such a long period of time. Do you know when the first New Testament book was written? Probably the book of Galatians is in the early 50s AD, early to mid 50s AD. So Jesus died 33 AD, the apostles get busy planting churches. And about the time the apostles are like, we better start writing some stuff down, or we've got these churches planted and they need some help, then the letters start to be written. Pretty much all of the eyewitnesses of the life of Jesus, even the ones who don't believe in him, were still alive when all the Bible was written, when all the New Testament was written. And so the last book, anybody know what the last book of the New Testament written was? Probably Revelation. We think John's Revelation is mid 90s. Every book written by the end of the first century, while eyewitnesses are still living and could contradict whether the message was true. And so when people say that they were written so much later, usually some people say, well, where do they get that information? And the answer is they pull it, I don't want to be crude, but they pull it out of places where the sun doesn't shine. Because there's no historical, there's no academic basis for making those claims. Have you guys heard C.S. Lewis's testimony? You know, the Chronicles of Narnia guy, the Mere Christianity guy. Do you know his testimony? C.S. Lewis was an Oxford professor. He was an agnostic. You know what his field of expertise was? Literature. He was an English prof. He studied ancient literature. And he was an agnostic. He didn't believe, but he had this friend named J.R. Tolkien. He's the Lord of the Rings guy who told him he needs to read the Bible and take it seriously. And so he started reading the Bible in part to debunk the Bible. And so here's the thing about Lewis is he understood, as a professor who studied these things, the difference between ancient history and mythological lore. He understood the difference between mythology and history. And so he starts reading the Gospels. And what he sees is they bear all the qualities of history and none of the qualities of mythology. And so it, at minimum, made him take seriously that the people who wrote were writing down events that they firmly believed happened in history and that they witnessed. So it doesn't prove that they're true, but it did prove that, to Lewis at least, that the Bible, that the New Testament, the Gospels were history, not mythology. And it led to his eventual conversion. Another reason we don't think the Bible's mythology is because mythology tends to elevate heroes. They get better and better over time. You think about the Greek heroes and all these great accomplishments, and they fought the dragon and they defeated the serpent or whatever, and they were like larger than life. The people became like gods in the mythology. How does the Bible treat its human heroes? What about Abraham? Does it record cool things that Abraham did, faith that Abraham had in God? Does it record anything bad that Abraham did? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he prostituted his wife. That was bad. What about Moses? Record anything good about Moses? Leading people out of slavery? That's pretty good. Yeah, being the first prophet, that's pretty good. Moses do anything bad? Oh, yeah, he didn't believe God. He told God, don't send me, send somebody else. I'm a stutterer. He got ticked off and broke the 10 Commandments, and God ended up punishing him. Like, it does not sugarcoat Moses' life. What about David? Greatest king in all the history of Israel. Does it record anything bad David did? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's the whole Bathsheba murder, adultery incident was not good. King Solomon, most successful, prosperous king. Does it record anything bad Solomon did? Yeah, he worshipped idols and married 700 women. Not good. The Bible did not condone that. What about Peter when we get to the New Testament? Here's the guy who's like the chief of the apostles. Did Peter do anything messed up? Oh, it does not pretend that Peter never made a mistake. Here's a guy who rebuked Jesus, who denied Jesus. Here's a guy who, even after Jesus rose from the dead, turns into a racist, and Paul has to confront him for being a racist towards Gentiles. So the Bible does not sugarcoat its heroes at all. And so it tells us that at minimum the character of the Bible is not mythology but history. Does that make sense? Let's do another one. Translation. I'll just say about translation, because some people will say stuff gets lost in translation whenever you go from one language to another. The 2 points to make there are, one, Biblical Greek, Biblical Hebrew are the 2 most studied languages in all the ancient world. The Bible is the most translated book, most scrutinized. The translations are the most scrutinized documents ever translated. And what you have in English is a very, very good translation. All your English well, there's a few bad ones, but pretty much all your English translations are good translations. You can trust them. What about the next one? We're doing on time. We got 10 minutes. What about the list of books we have? So we said the Bible is 66 books, 39 Old Testament, 27 New Testament. There are a lot of people who will criticize the New Testament books, and they'll say, well, we know there were other letters written. We know there were other Gospels written. How did we end up with the 27? And if you've ever watched like The Da Vinci Code, do you remember that old movie by a guy named Dan Brown? He wrote a book. They made a movie. Tom Hanks, wasn't Tom Hanks in that movie? It has all these conspiracy theories in it about Constantine just decided to suppress the truth and pick these 27 books as a way to control people's minds. And if there was a YouTube movie probably, it was 10 or 12 years ago called The Zeitgeist, and it put all these conspiracy theories about how we got the Bible all into this movie. And it basically said Constantine decided at the Council of Nicaea which books would go in, and because he wanted to control the church. You ever heard anything kind of quite like that? The only problem with that is it's just a total fabrication. It's not true at all. When did Christians recognize the books of the New Testament as Scripture? Interestingly, they started recognizing them even during the time of the New Testament. If you want to write a reference down, 2 Peter 3:16. 2 Peter 3:16. It's a funny quote, if I can remember it. It talks a little bit about suffering. And then Peter talks about Paul's letters. You know, Paul wrote 13 books in the New Testament. And Peter says Paul writes letters, and sometimes he's very confusing to read. Is it true or not true? Everybody ever read Romans? It's confusing. So Peter says Paul writes confusing letters, and he said, but all of the scriptures, many of the scriptures are confusing. And so Peter makes an explicit reference, and he calls, while Paul's still alive, Paul's still writing, Peter's looked to as sort of this chief of the apostles. And Peter says Paul's books are Scripture. And he says that while Paul's in the middle of writing his book. So when did they start recognizing the books as Scripture? And the answer is really, really early. By the end of the first century, while some of the apostles are still alive or just as they're dying, 21 of the 27 books are unanimously accepted as true. Now, we wish it were neat. We wish that it were like, you know, the Apostle John dies, he's the last one, and then there's like, they throw a party and they say, okay, now the Bible's finished, here are the 27 books, and it's done. Took a little more time, but by the time John died and his revelation is received by the churches, 21 of the 27 were unanimously accepted. By 50 years later, they're publishing lists with the 27 books listed as the 27 books of Scripture. Some people will say, but it wasn't until 200 years later that a church council made a decision. I think it was the Council of Constantinople, made a decision and recognized the 27 books of the New Testament as Scripture. And there's some truth that council made that decision, but the council, if you look at the council, if you read the history, the council just said, we already know what the books are, let's just acknowledge it. And so very early on, now there were some books, this is where the Bible is not as messy as it's messier than we wish it was. There were some books that took some time. Bruce Ware is a theologian, and he says, here's the criteria the early church used to decide if a book was Scripture or not. It had to be written by a prophet or an apostle, recognized prophet or an apostle, or somebody associated with a recognized prophet or an apostle. So for instance, Matthew wrote Matthew, he was an apostle. John wrote John, he was an apostle, but Mark wasn't an apostle. But Mark was friend of Peter, and he wrote Peter's account, so he's associated with an apostle. Luke wasn't an apostle, but he was an associate of Paul, and he was friends with the other apostles, so he's an associate of the apostles. And so all the New Testament books were connected. There were a few, for instance, Hebrews. Who wrote Hebrews? God only knows. And so it took time for Hebrews to be accepted, but over time the church said, we're not sure who wrote it. I think Apollos wrote it, but we're not sure who wrote it. But we see the hand of God on it. The book of James, we're not sure we like everything James says because he seems to contradict Paul, but we sense the hand of God on it, and he was a brother of Jesus. So they accepted James. But some of the books took a little longer than others, but eventually unanimous. Let's keep going. If I were to do one more question on the page, which one do you want to hear about? I'll let y'all vote. Second to the last one, the evil stuff. How could God allow evil? Is that the one? I can't remember what the last one y'all's. Okay. Yeah. So I put those at the end in part because those are not really questions about, those are questions about theology and interpretation of the Bible more than questions about can you trust the Bible, but they do kind of get at some real heart issues. And one of the things we have to remember is most of the time when people are making criticisms of the Bible, it's not because they've started with a head-centered intellectual investigation of the Bible. It's because they have a personal hurt or a personal offense. So some people don't like the Bible because they care about LGBT people. And they don't like, and so they're uncomfortable with the testimony about what Christian sexuality is in the Bible, so they question the Bible. And so that's less an intellectual question, just like let's get the facts out on the table, and more a deep heart question. When you guys did the survey about what you wanted to hear about, I think there were multiple people said, I'd like to talk about how can I love LGBT people but stay true to the faith. So we may do that one week. I've got a teaching on that. So I'm trying to decide in 5 minutes how do we handle 5 weeks worth of material. Let me just kind of I'll just hit a couple bullet points on how do you deal with the fact that there's just some things that make us really uncomfortable in Scripture. Commands to genocide, discussions of slavery, a sexual ethic that has led, unfortunately, to the church being unkind to people who don't follow that sexual ethic. Warfare, seeming to condone warfare in certain situations. I'll kind of point us in a right direction without knowing that we can't answer all those. So for starters, one, just because the Bible describes something doesn't mean the Bible condones that thing. Just because the Bible says something happened doesn't mean that the Bible's saying it was supposed to happen or it should happen every time. So here's a for instance. Some people say, so slavery could be a part of that. There are commands regulating slavery. Now, is that the Bible establishing slavery, or is that Leviticus and Numbers acknowledging that an institution exists and saying if it's going to exist in a way that treats human beings with dignity? So that's part of it. The Bible does record a lot of stuff that God did not want to happen. There are 4 chapters in the whole Bible that describe a perfect world. Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and 22. Everything in the middle is marred by sin. Everything in the middle is God trying to regulate a world that's far from perfect. So that's one part of the issue there. The other problem is you can make an accusation in 10 seconds, but it can take a long time to unpack and explain. That's the Lego analogy, right? And so some of these issues, you can say the Bible's anti-gay, the Bible is homophobic. The Bible is anti-woman. And there's really good reasons to say, no, the Bible holds up the dignity of every human being in a beautiful way. The Bible says that every person's created in the image of God. You know, there's a reason that women flocked to the early church. It's because there was no institution on earth that treated women with the dignity that the Christian church treated them. Husbands, love your wives was the most countercultural statement of the day, because wives were property and husbands owned them. And so to say wives were human beings and husbands were to love them the way they love their own body and love them the way Christ loved the church and be willing to sacrifice their life for hers was revolutionary. So the Bible doesn't degrade women. The Bible lifts women up in a way that no other institution ever did. Interestingly, in the New Testament, the slavery issue is interesting. There are two passages that give rules and regulations for slavery connected to the church. So that's Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3. And they talk about if you have servants or slaves, this is how you're to treat them. And if you're a slave, this is how you're to work. So 2 times. There's only one time in the whole New Testament where the Bible actually, a letter addresses an actual slave owner individually. Do you know what that letter is? Yeah, Philemon. And in Philemon, Paul tells the slave owner who is a Christian, in regard to his runaway slave who's become a Christian, that he should set his slave free. So the only time the Bible in the New Testament addresses a specific instance, the counsel is release him from his service. So that's not the full answer, but that's like the beginnings of an answer. Homosexuality, yes, the church is messed up on this issue. Yes, all sin is sin. Yes, the Bible condemns a whole host of things: adultery, fornication, divorce, lust. Has the church singled out homosexuality in ways that with a vigor that it hasn't condemned other sexual sin and called people to God's standards? Sometimes, yes. Is there a reason maybe that sometimes churches can be perceived as talking more about homosexual behavior than other sexual sin? Well, I had this conversation with somebody last night, and they said, why does the church single out, homosexuality instead of other issues? And I said, well, one of the reasons maybe, among the things we've already mentioned, is that there's not an adultery pride movement. Does that make sense? There's not a divorce pride movement. But there is a gay pride movement. And so there are a lot of things in our culture that we sort of from our gut know aren't best for humanity when it comes to human sexuality. Like, imagine how much good could be done in the world if we eliminated fatherlessness, if we eliminated cheating, if we eliminated STDs, if we eliminated sex out of wedlock, like all the human suffering that would be ended if we eliminated those things. But in our gut, we know that most of those things are wrong, but now there's a movement to say, but this thing isn't. And so when the church speaks out about it, it is taken very differently by culture. If my pastor preaches on that divorce isn't a good idea, people say, yeah, you're right. But if my pastor preaches that homosexuality isn't God's design, then people get really upset. So that's one reason for the perception, but not the only reason. And so maybe another impact training, we'll go a little deeper. Let's do the last one. How could God allow evil? How could God send people to hell? That's way beyond today's topic. But here's what I'd say if your friend makes that accusation against the Bible. One is that atheists have to answer that question too. Atheists have to answer why there's evil in the world. And usually they want to throw that question at Christians, but they don't want to answer it themselves because their answer is untenable. Their answer is life is meaningless, life is purposeless, the strong destroy the weak, and when you die, you turn into stardust, and there's no meaning at all in life. And they don't want to say that, so they say, how do you explain evil? But they don't want to actually explain why there's human suffering from their worldview. And so that really didn't have to do with the Bible, but that's how I answer that question. So last statement, the Bible's no good if you don't read it, if you don't study it, if you don't memorize it, if you don't meditate on it, if you don't hide it in your heart. So if it's God's word, but we never put God's word in us, it can't change us. So it's one thing to say, I like the Bible, and it's a whole other thing to say, and I want to saturate my life in it. Because God has spoken. Think about that miracle. Like we wonder, sometimes we wish, man, God, I just wish you would open the heavens and stick your head down and give me a word. I just wish you would tell me, like, let me know you're there. Tell me some truth. And God says, I'll just write it down for you. I'll give you my very words. So let's cherish the scripture. So I'm going to pray, and then we'll take about a 2-minute break. And if you want to do evangelism, we'll meet right over there in 2 minutes. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, so much for blessing, gifting, lavishing us with the scriptures. We don't have to wonder what you have to say to us. We don't have to wonder about your love. We don't have to wonder about your character. We don't have to wonder about the mysteries of your will, because you've spoken. And God, I pray that when we open the pages of Scripture, the Holy Spirit in us would make your truth come alive, and your word would sanctify us and change us to be more like Jesus. And we'd cherish it and not take it for granted. In Jesus' name, amen.